We've been ranking a lot of classic black metal albums lately, but now it's time to rank the bands. And I'm going to do it a little bit differently than maybe what most people do. I'm not going to put a ton of weight on just like their name and their weight within the genre. I'm focusing more on the quality of their overall discography. So let's start with a big one in Enslaved. Now, these guys are probably my favorite black metal band, especially from the classic era, and what an astounding discography they have. Like, going back to their early work from their second wave days, some of my favorite albums from that era for sure, with Victingliger Veldi and Frost and all that, just fantastic, intense, hard-hitting, then moving into the more kind of like technical and progressive stuff while still melding that with the aggression on albums like Marduk, and then just going full out progressive with elements of like Pink Floyd and things like that. If you ask me, they don't have a single bad album. They don't even have like a mediocre album, really, in my opinion. Just one of the strongest discographies in the genre. You can check out my tier list to hear my thoughts on every single one, but I'm clearly putting them up at the top at perfection tier. Next up, let's do Dissection, a short but sweet discography. Definitely a benchmark in terms of that melodic black metal sound. Lots of elements coming in since they are Swedish from the like Swedish death metal sound as well. But just such a fantastic fusion of those worlds, and one that I still hear plenty of new bands kind of like reinterpreting, and just definitely kind of starting with that blueprint. As far as their discography goes, it's pretty strong. Again, it's short, so it's kind of harder for me to put them like up at the tippy top, but what they put out was all very solid. So I'm ultimately putting this at fantastic tier. All right, what about Mayhem? Again, another band that there's going to be some hot takes on here, again, based on my criteria versus other people's. I think a lot of people would put Mayhem at the top just because like they're one of the progenitors, right? They're one of the first of that second wave, like the true black metal sound, so to speak. So credit where it's due with that. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about overall discography. And honestly, I think that Mayhem's discography is a little bit spotty. Like, there's a reason why I said that De Mysteriis is probably one of the most overrated albums on my most overrated albums list. And honestly, like, even from there, there's a lot of stuff that I don't really enjoy that much. There's a lot of filler in their albums, if you ask me, a lot of bloat, just a lot of dead time, some really great songs, but you have to kind of like sift through a lot of stuff to get there. And I challenge you all who are already getting mad and typing in the comments, which, by the way, thank you, because you're sending engagement signals that are going to help the video. Do it! But seriously, I challenge you, if you haven't listened to all their albums in a while, like, give them a good, solid, objective, critical re-listen and decide, like, are these really albums that I reach for first when I want to listen to good black metal? So, again, important, some solid stuff to be found, but overall for me, I just think that they belong at good tier. All right, we got a classic here, Bathory, really kind of going into proto-black metal. Some people then argue, why isn't Venom on here and other stuff? I could go into all that, but I'm not really. I feel like Bathory just overall is the most black metal of the sort of proto first wave black metal bands. Now, again, very important, we're talking discography here though. Now, their early stuff in particular, I absolutely love, especially Bloodfire Death, absolute classic. I could throw on that album at any time and just have a great time with it. And then I also enjoy the kind of folkier stuff like Hammerheart. Now, you ventured too far away from there. I know some people really like the latest stuff, but I think the further you get into the discography, the weaker it kind of gets. I think the vocal performances in particular kind of drag things down for me. Compositionally, things get a little bit loose and I start to kind of get bored in certain areas. Things are dragged out longer than they need to be. So that pulls it down a little bit for me, but I still think Bathory, really great, and I'm going to put them at great tier. I know some people are going to be mad about that. All right, what about Marduk? So another band where I think there's kind of an album or two that I really enjoy. But overall, I've found their discography to be kind of mid. And I've seen a lot of people in the Discord kind of agreeing with that. So I don't think this will necessarily be a hot take, but I think they have their moments. I think they've had their time to shine. They have their ups and downs, but a little bit inconsistency. So I'm just going to put them at good tier as well. Ooh, but here's a real one that is going to be an even harder hot take, because everything I said about Mayhem, basically, I think also applies to Burzum in terms of their importance, especially to like atmospheric black metal, and even honestly if we're being real here, a lot of the black gaze and post-black stuff very much derives where it comes from the foundation that Burzum laid down, okay? So, again, important. Discography, not a big fan. Like, I just find it to be extremely dull. This is all subjective, of course, too. Like, some people still watch these videos and they're like, there's no objective ranking. I'm like, no shit, Sherlock. There is no objective ranking. Like, this is just my opinion. I don't think that this is some, like, thing that should be applied in general. It's just how I feel. And I find Burzum's discography to be extremely dull for the most part. I love Philosophem. If you're going to pick out, like, an S-tier album from the collection, that's the one. But honestly, I'm just putting them at okay, not my thing, and you can get as pissed off as you want. Please do, comment below. Get pissed off. Promote the video to the algorithm. Love it. Thanks. Alright, Darkthrone. They might get some mixed reactions on here. Again, if we're talking about the early discography, the like pure black metal albums, love those, especially like the core trilogy, so to speak. A Blaze in the Northern Sky to Transylvanian Hunger. Like, those are the albums I'm going to continue to reach for. I even have the special editions on my shelf with the commentary from Fenriz. Fantastic. Classics. Love listening to those. I'm not a huge fan of the more like crusty and doom direction of some of the albums. I actually did like the new one quite a bit, more than I thought I would. But yeah, I think this is where I and Chris, who writes a lot of the written reviews for metaltrenches.com, disagree, because he definitely enjoys a lot of those later albums more than I do personally. I'm kind of okay with them. I don't love them. So it's sort of like splitting the difference here. I'm still going to put them at great tier because I choose to listen to most of their albums over some of the ones below it, but that's where they're at. Gorgoroth, another one I had to think about a lot, because talk about a discography where there are some high highs and low lows. Like, I absolutely adore the first three albums, especially Under the Sign of Hell, another S-tier album, and then the Gaul era is fantastic. Definitely my favorite Gorgoroth vocalist. We talked about him on Best Metal Vocalists. Ad Majorum is fantastic. Possibly my favorite. It's always a toss-up between that and Under the Sign of Hell, kind of for different reasons. Outside of that, though, there's a lot of just not very good albums, too. Straight-up albums that I really just don't like at all. Like, their modern output is extremely weak, if you ask me. They haven't been the same since Gaul left, in my opinion, so that really drags them down a lot. So as much as I originally, when I was first putting this together, I was putting them relatively high just because of how much I love those earlier albums. Ultimately, with the weight of their full discography and the band itself, I'm just putting them at good tier, and it almost pains me to do that. Again, let me know down in the comments how you think about that, if you feel differently. All right, another big one here, Immortal. So, long discography here. Another video you can check out that I'm looking forward to updating in the future. Stellar discography. Like, not maybe as strong as Enslaved, because Enslaved also have the fact that they've evolved going for them, which I still find to be like a really important factor. Immortal have just basically been immortal the whole time. They've had some slight variations. They've had albums that are a little bit more atmospheric, others that are a little bit more gritty and heavy and raw, but ultimately the riffs are pretty much the same. You know what you're going to expect. The same thing people say about the Black Dahlia murder in melodic death metal applies to Immortal for black metal. But their consistency is just undoubtable. Like, I do feel like that was another kind of tougher tier list because they're so similar that it's only like by degrees that I like albums differently. And I could really grab at any one and have a good time. I certainly have my favorites, but really consistent, and I'm putting them up at perfection tier. Satyricon, another one where kind of ups and downs. Love Nemesis Divina, and I love Dark Medieval Times for completely different reasons, but both S-tier fantastic albums I talked about in their subsequent lists based on where they fit within their discography. Another one, though, outside of that, some inconsistency rises up. I'm still kind of like digging into them more to see if my opinions change, but ultimately I'm still feeling kind of like good tier for them. I appreciate that they are showing some evolution too, and I'm interested to kind of like dig more into the more modern material, but as it stands just in this moment right now, I just don't like them as much as some of the others as far as the full discography goes. Borknagar, another one where just really interesting, a standout I'd say on this list in that they kind of went a different direction. They went for this more kind of bombastic, not necessarily symphonic direction. There are some elements of that, but it's more like almost like operatic. I especially enjoy ICS Vortex's work within the band, but really there have been so many talented members in this band over the years, and each iteration kind of brings something a bit different. I don't maybe love Borknagar as much as some people do, but I really think that their discography is there's a lot to dig into there. There's a lot of depth to it, a lot of girth to it, and so I want to credit them for that. I think that they belong at fantastic tier. Carpathian Forest has been an interesting one because they weren't a band I dug into a lot as much when I was initially kind of getting started listening to a lot of these bands, but as again I've been going album for album in my tier list series with them, I've been really impressed with just how much I enjoy all of them. Like really just solid, rebellious, kind of punk-infused black metal that just has so much attitude and just like to it, like a lot of just like grossness and just pure middle finger energy constantly for these guys, and pretty consistent too. I do think that a little bit later on, they don't have the longest discography, but as we get to like the final albums, things start to peter off a little bit, but for the most part, really consistent. Maybe not as much as I love these other ones, so I'm going to put them at great tier. Another one that's going to make some people mad potentially, but I'm not alone in this, I know, from talking on the Discord and in the comments section. But Dark Funeral, another one, I'm just going to do it. I'm putting them at okay, not my thing. And that became very clear when I did my Dark Funeral tier list and listened and re-listened to all the albums in preparation for the new one. I can safely say that besides Burzum, they're my least favorite band to listen to. I just don't get a whole lot from any of their discography. There are certain albums here and there that I enjoyed, but even my favorites from Dark Funeral just fall so short of my favorites from basically most of the bands on this list. And so I just like, if someone's like, let's listen to black metal, they're going to be one of the last names that I think of. So I think they belong at okay, not my thing. All right, getting into some potentially dicey territory as always, the more sort of mainstream, not so cult black metal bands here for these next two. But we got Dimmu Borgir. They were there right from the beginning, y'all, like whether you want to accept it or not. And I enjoy their early stuff. Love Stormblast in particular. Really fun album, and I am a sucker for symphonic black metal just in general. Like, it's just something that really appeals to me. Symphonic, extreme metal in general, whether it be death or black metal or anything in between, just does it for me. I don't think Dimmu Borgir have a bad album. And there's going to be a lot of people who argue with me on that. That's totally fine. I get why some people don't like certain albums. But for me, they have fantastic albums. And then they have albums that are still fun and enjoyable to listen to all the way through. I just don't think that there's a dud among them. Enjoyed the latest one, even though it was a little bit more stripped back, maybe even partially because of that. But I can't help too that like I'm a little bit biased because Progenies of the Great Apocalypse was like my big intro to this band with that music video. And holy shit, what a video, what a song. Just such an impact it made on me. And then digging back through all of their discography back in late high school, was around that time. They're just great, and I almost put them at perfection, but I don't think they're quite there. That said, I'm going to put them at fantastic. And then Cradle of Filth. Again, people seem to love or hate them. I've been noticing it's been a shift, because I remember when I was in high school, Dimmu Borgir was the cool band to like, and Cradle of Filth was for like the goth girls and people who didn't really like the hard stuff. Now I see a lot of people shitting on Dimmu Borgir and a lot of people showing a lot of love for Cradle of Filth. So even though I don't think you should shit on either, it's kind of cool to see the love for them. I know they wouldn't even self-identify as black metal, and that's fine, but there's enough elements there, and they've been around long enough that I think they deserve to be on this list. And as far as their discography goes, a little inconsistent. I'd say a little bit more inconsistent than Dimmu Borgir. They've got some really high highs, and particularly, you know, you've got the classics, but then also they're in this like renaissance where honestly, like their past 3 albums or so in the modern era have just been absolute bangers. Some of the best music they've ever put together. Like great riffs, great production, great overall just emphasis on the atmosphere and the symphonic elements. And Danny Filth, love him or hate him, he has such a recognizable, interesting, just different take on the vocals that I really appreciate. So I love them. I almost put them higher, but I do think they've got a couple duds in their discography that cause me to pull them down just slightly. So I'm going to put them at great tier. Rotting Christ, so the Greek legends of black metal, and very interesting discography for them too, I would say. Going back to, like, A Dead Poem is my first, like, classic favorite, but their earlier stuff, even before that, is pretty interesting, very different. The melodies that they chose, they kind of forged that Greek sound. And I love watching the, like, Black Metal 101 video with Fenris on the chalkboard, and he does talk about, you know, the Greek scene. And I think Rotting Christ are a big part of that. And another band that have evolved and progressed a lot beyond that, to the point where it's hard for me to even call them black metal with a lot of the newer albums, but they're kind of like that plus something more. They're a little bit up and down. I kind of love every other album, and then the ones in between I'm kind of a little bit lukewarm on. But another one where I'd say they haven't put out a truly bad album. They've been pretty consistent. They're pretty different. They're trying new things a lot of the time, testing the waters with different kind of stylistic approaches, and for that I'm going to put them at fantastic. Emperor, another giant, but with a short discography. But I gotta tell you, like I said, I love me some symphonic black metal, and nobody does it like Emperor, y'all. Like, those first two albums in particular are absolutely legendary for a reason. They're untouchable. They're S tier. And really, the two albums after that get some shit, but revisiting them for, again, the tier list series I've been doing, they're not only not bad, they're quite good. Like, I really had a good time with those as well. So, Emperor, I don't think you can go wrong, and they're just like the gold standard for great symphonic black metal. Solid discography, even though it's short. I'm going to put them at perfection. Sacramentum, a band I've been enjoying introducing a lot of people to because I feel like they're a little bit underrated. They don't get talked about as much. Their debut in particular, and the one after that, pretty strong stuff. Like, kind of melding some elements of sort of Dissection, a little bit of, like, Emperor in there, a little bit of everything mixed in the sound for this, again, more kind of melodic, atmospheric sort of experience. And they do it very well. But I'd say they only have, like, 2 really solid albums. They're another one with a shorter discography. They may be putting out another one. I've been hearing that they've been working on a new one for quite a long time, so we'll see where that brings us. But as it stands, as much as I have a personal love for them and want people to continue checking them out, on this list, I think they only quite make the good tier. Which, again, pretty much everything on this list is worth checking out. That's sort of the bottom line here, is these videos are really designed to act as a means to get people excited talking about this stuff and checking out things that maybe they haven't. Samael, another group doing a lot of different things than anybody else on this list. Again, going back to their early stuff, really solid. Again, kind of like slightly punky, slightly more first wave sounding influences on that, and really well done. Like, lots of great just intensity and scariness, kind of like Satanism and all those elements fused into it really well. And then they start fusing in the industrial sound, and that's super cool. Like, blackened industrial music is something that there's not enough of, but whenever I hear it, I'm excited to hear it, because it's all such an interesting thing. There are some albums later on when they kind of go more full-on industrial that I'm not as in love with it, even though I love industrial metal. But I really like Samael. I like what they do. I'm excited to kind of spend more time with them because they're another band I kind of came to a little bit later in the game. As it stands on here, I feel like they could fit pretty well on great tier. Ulver, I had to really rack my brain on this one too, because I'm particularly a lover of the pure black metal stuff from Ulver, which actually only accounts for a very small like percentage of their overall discography. But those are absolutely legendary and very different too. Like, right from the beginning, you start with this like really super atmospheric kind of folky album, and then you get this super raw, like one of the ugliest produced black metal albums, but I fucking love it. Just all around really interesting. And then from there, obviously going into more ambient and experimental avant-garde directions. I'm not as in love with that stuff, but I respect the hell out of it. And I just love any musician that's just willing to just do whatever the fuck they want, regardless of what their audience is going to say or do in response. So for that reason, I ultimately decided to put Ulver at fantastic. And then we're going to end on a personal classic, one of the slightly later bands on this list, but I don't care. Like, I do think they pretty much fit in with this group. Windir, just excellent. Another relatively short discography, artist who was gone before his time, and I wish we could have gotten more from him, but the music that they put out was just so incredible. And I love their style. You hear a Windir riff and you instantly know who it is. Like, they have a very particular style to the guitars. And interesting too, in that they're making that raw black metal sound, but they make it fun. Like, people ask me sometimes, and I've said this before, how can you work out to black metal? And I'm like, throw on Windir's 1184. And that is your answer right there. That is how you can work out to a Windir album. So for me, personally, gonna end on a top one with Perfection. Y'all, if you've been missing the other tier list leading up to this one, where I've been ranking first albums, second albums, third albums, you can check out this playlist. And as always, let me know again down in the comments, how did you rank these? Differently, the same? Let's have a conversation. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.